All right, welcome back to the channel. So in this video, we're going to talk about Jermell Charlo being called out by Brian Castano, who is rubbing it in. He says, "You need redemption. Tell Al Haymon to call me." I think that's a little bit unfair because shouldn't both of them need redemption? The fight was a draw. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. Before I get into the meat of the video, please make sure if you're not already subscribed to subscribe to the channel. Also like the video, share the video, it would be greatly appreciated. Helps the channel grow. Let's talk about a fight that really does need to happen again, and that is the fight between Jermell Charlo and Brian Castano, a fight that I thought was an absolutely terrific fight. It was kind of a tale of two fights. One fight was the fight that was happening in the middle of the ring. The other fight was the fight that was happening against the ropes, and Brian Castano won the fight when it was against the ropes. Jermell Charlo won the fight when it was in the middle of the ring. And you know who you thought would won the fight, you know, it depends on it's the case of the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Who did you like? The person that had the flashy stuff at the end of the rounds, or the person that did who did more of the steady work throughout the entirety of the round? You know, it kind of depends on what you like. However, Brian Castano is of the feeling and of the mindset that, first of all, and I'm glad that he wants to run that fight back with Jermell Charlo. And Jermell Charlo, I do believe, also wants to run the fight back with Brian Castano. I think that is a really, really good thing. But Brian Castano was actually rubbing it in, and he's rubbing it in a way where I'm thinking that, you know, everything's not quite right with what he's saying. And that he says on one, and this is two separate interviews, he says that Jermell Charlo needs redemption from that fight, from the fight, as if, you know, there's something that Jermell Charlo lost in that fight that Brian Castano didn't lose in that fight. When, you know, now maybe I'm an excessively practical person, but to me, I don't think Jermell Charlo lost much of anything in that fight, and I don't think Brian Castano lost anything in that fight, other than, well, they did gain the ability to do another rematch for, even with, I suspect, a lot more money and a lot bigger audience, because that fight was an incredible fight. But the idea that Jermell Charlo needs redemption, I think, is a bit of a mind game, in saying that you lost that fight. A lot of people thought you lost that fight. I don't think Jermell Charlo sees himself as having lost that fight, or Derek James see themselves of having lost that fight, because, you know, number one, they didn't lose that fight. That fight was a draw, and it is what it is. You know, you can play mind games if you want, but the mind games, if they don't work, don't do any good. And the fact of the matter is, Jermell Charlo still holds 3 of the major championship belts at that weight division. He holds the WBA, the WBC, and the IBF. He was that champion walking into the ring. He's their champion walking out of the ring. He got his paycheck. I don't think that there was any loss there. The only people that would necessarily think that there was a loss there is people that underestimated Brian Castano. Now, I personally never underestimated Brian Castano, because Brian Castano fought to a draw with Erislandy Lara, and if you watch how that fight went, it kind of was similar to the way that the fight went with Jermell Charlo, except for, I think, in my personal opinion, Erislandy Lara never did really get and hurt Brian Castano like Jermell Charlo did. But anyway, Brian Castano is saying, hey, tell Al to let's make the fight. Now, there is Al being Al Haymon, who runs the PBC. Now, the problem with the rematch happening is that there's several roadblocks to it, and one of them is that Jermell Charlo has a mandatory title defense that was been ordered for Bakarem Murtalizev. I'm absolutely killing his name. I have never seen him fight, but he's the mandatory for the IBF. And one thing that you know about the IBF is that the IBF absolutely will enforce a mandatory if you're not, now what they say is unification trumps a mandatory, but I'm not sure whether or not they had already that the IBF had already delayed the mandatory to allow the unification fight to take place. And the IBF, to its credit, unlike the unlike pretty much every other sanctioned body, definitely the WBC, will hold their champions, no matter how big their champion is, will hold their champions to fighting their mandatory. The perfect example of that was when the IBF actually stripped Canelo Alvarez for not fighting Sergey Deverenchenko, and Jermell Charlo wound up fighting Sergey Deverenchenko, but that was after Gennady Golovkin beat Deverenchenko for the IBF, for the vacant IBF belt. So the IBF is somebody that will actually strip you for that. So that might be a hindrance to them. And also the WBO, I think they are anticipating, people are anticipating the WBO ordering Tim Tszyu to fight Brian Castano. So that is, that is the kind of the roadblocks to the fight. But at the same time, there's a chance that this fight should go off, ahead of it should go off before those other fights take place. Now, there was a lot of judging controversy in this fight as well that I think may have led Brian Castano to feel like he needed some type of redemption. And I don't think that quote unquote controversy is going to be there the next time, especially because with the WBA, because if you recall, maybe about 2 weeks ago, there was a fight between Michael Fox and a guy that last name is Maestra. And Michael Fox looked like he won the majority of the rounds, looked like he won. He knocked Maestra down, looked like he won the fight, going away. And they gave the scorecard, or they gave the fight to Maestra. Now, the result of that has been this big brouhaha where the Association of Boxing Commissions have actually threatened to sanction the WBA for the corruption in that particular fight. So, and by sanction them, they mean that they would probably not sanction any WBA fights. Now, it sounds funny to say that the ABC won't sanction organization that sanctions fights, but that's pretty much how it's set up. The Association of Boxing Councils in the United States oversees the state boxing commissions and oversees the international boxing organizations. And if they say that they're not going to sanction a WBA fight in the United States, that means that it's going to be it's going to be illegal for the WBA to hold any championship fights in the United States. And that would cost them a whole lot of money. So I think that you should probably start getting more definitive decisions in boxing matches, because the other sanctioning bodies would also be concerned about the same thing. And more than likely, we won't get, at least I'm hoping that we won't get the judging controversy that we got in the last fight, which led to this need for redemption from Jermell Charlo, if you believe that he needed to be redeemed. But anyway, that's my take on the situation. You let me know what you think. And with that, I'm out. Peace.